Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Two Blokes podcast. Today, the two blokes are myself and kindness seeker Mao, and Mao will be introducing us to the issues of video game addiction and also the Hikkikomori crisis. Thank you for coming, and pull up a stump and join us. All right. And because I don't know a whole lot about either one of those things, at least not in detail, I think if it's all right with you, Mao, I'll just turn it over to you and you can introduce the topics any way you like.
Oh yeah. Thank you for having me again. And yeah, like this time around, it is truly like just two blokes. Um, and well, the reason why I wanted to talk about these two specific subjects is because there are a lot of people, a lot of political pundits that they wanna talk about these two issues, which are they do have a little bit some things in common, but mostly it's really politically expedient to manipulate the issues and adapting them into their talking points, you know. So first, I want to like explain uh, the video game addiction and the Hikkikomori crisis in a very neutral manner. And then I want to give my criticisms about the people that try to manipulate those two subjects into fitting their political framework, you know? And I want to start with video game addiction. And I want to begin by talking about how there's a very specific reason why, like men in general, they do like video games. They're the primary target demographic for it. Unless we exclude, of course, like Candy Crush on the mobile devices, obviously, that market is entirely dominated by women. But when it comes to like the majority of games, it is gonna be men that they're very attracted to the video games. I want to actually explain why. So, because I do want to explain first the healthy behavior and then why the unhealthy behavior manifests. So, when it comes to video games, it is what I consider to be like it is the equivalent of sports, in the sense that there is competition. There you have the single player games, which is man versus the machine. You know, the developers have programmed whatever puzzles or challenges, and you gotta beat them. That's the challenge. That's the sports aspect of it, of the competition. Then you have the multiplayers, and it's like you're competing with other players to be the environment, or the quests or the objective, So that's like the similarities between video games and sports. And in my opinion, they can be very healthy because like no one is dying, you know. No one is dying in real life. They're only like ones and zeros and sprites and all of that. So that's pretty healthy in that sense. So you got the competition, you got the hierarchy, and I think that's the main reason why men are attracted to it. So then we go into the problem of the addiction part of it, and like from my personal experience, I think that there is a commonality between people who are like predisposed to certain addictions. There are certain men who are very addicted to just the competition aspect of it. And video games are like a very like easy way of um having getting some access to one competition. It's like all you need is like a PC or like a console, a video game console. And there you go, you can just plug in a game and you have an entire uh an entire experience of a competition right there. If you're like predisposed to that addiction. Another one could be the desire for a challenge, the desire to improve. And I think this is the actual societal issue. Because like in real life, when men are not allowed to like grow and make mistakes and compete and actually develop, then they're gonna seek that out in any other medium. And that can, get into the unhealthy habits of going for like the video games as an escapism for something they are not being allowed to get in the real world, you know? So this is something interesting because there's this there was this I don't even know how to call him. This He wasn't a serial killer. He was just one of those rampant killers called Elliot Roger. I think he was from California, maybe. I don't know, but
Yeah.
he was an incel. He had like a lot of mental issues, like narcissism, and I don't know what else. He was like abused as a child or something, and he had that specific issue. Like he was addicted to World of Warcraft, I think, maybe other video games, but in his giant manifesto, he was like he talked about how, okay, so he wasn't really developing as a person. He wasn't studying or working. He felt a lot of jealousy about like his father, the people around him. He felt like he wasn't really doing much with his life and climbing a hierarchy. But in the video game, in the World of Warcraft video game, he was someone, he was something. He was actually doing stuff there. He was actually rising to one challenge, getting better at the mechanics of the video game, you know. He was actually feeling rewarded, obviously more than in real life, because he actually knew the rules. He knew how they work. There was like a veneer of fairness, which I think is extremely important. I think, to be honest, that is one of the things that are like attract people the most to video games. Like the idea of fairness, like the idea that the game has rules, and those rules are just not gonna break because it is literally designed to be a certain way, unless the game is glitchy or it's not like coded properly. Then yeah, it's like your character is just gonna fall through the floor or whatever. But that's considered to be a mistake that can be actually remedied. It can be patched out and stuff. But it's very appealing. So you have this idea, this interactive experience in which you can make as many mistakes as you want. Your character can die over and over again, and you can learn from those mistakes. The rules are set, they're very clear. You have objectives. There's a competition and a hierarchy. You know your place. There's a fairness aspect. Nobody likes cheaters, so they get banned. If you can catch them. So, in my opinion, this is the perfect like storm, the perfect combination for what people want. And if they're not getting it in real life, they're gonna seek it out. And video games happen to be the most easily accessible experience that can give them that. So, on one hand, like societally speaking, when it comes to the rise of video game addiction, I think it really speaks out against the things that we lack in society. Because if people are seeking video games, it means that our society doesn't have clear rules. It doesn't have a ladder that people can climb to get respect, competition, status, money, whatever. It's not fair, and yeah, so that would be like one of the reasons, you know.
Yeah.
Then you got the predisposition, the people who are gonna be predisposed to like video game addiction no matter what, and that's very tricky. Like I said, like I mentioned, some people are just addicted to the competition, so they're just gonna play like Call of Duty like forever, or I don't know, FIFA, whatever is the most competitive video game out there, and that's gonna be it. Then you have the people who just they're very addicted to the rewards that a video game give, and you can actually see that with the Diablo games and the World of Warcraft games, because they have the system of you get the random rewards. So you complete a quest, you get something random, which makes it very unpredictable. Which is very similar to gambling, actually, which is part of my other critique, because then you have the other people who are just straight up predisposed to gambling, and so happens that some video games have gambling mechanics into them, like the Counter-Strike loot boxes. So you buy one and you get a random, I don't know, weapon skin that you can like slap onto your weapon or just sell on the market. So some people are just addicted to that. They're predisposed to that addiction. And that's not really like specifically about video games. It's just the superficial aspects of the video games. Because video games are not really built on top of like gambling or gambling in general. So when it comes to the addiction part of it, there's some people who are just gonna be addicted. There's some people who are gonna be thrown into a very unhealthy relationship with video games. Because society is not giving them what they want or need in real life,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's like the storm gathering, the things that push people into like video game addiction, or at the very least, a very unhealthy relationship with those video games instead. Maybe it's not like 100% an addiction, but that is like my explanation, a very neutral explanation as to why that happens. I don't know if you have anything to correct me on or anything you want to say before I move on.
Unfortunately, I really don't. The only thing the only thing I would add is, because of my own experience with addiction, that was not, I never had a process addiction like video games or gambling or porn or, anything like that. But at least the like the common wisdom and the approach that people in the addiction counseling and therapy and rehab industries, their approach is that these things, whether it's alcohol or drugs or gambling or sex or porn or video games, that there comes a point, really whether you're predisposed to it or not, but especially if you are, there comes a point at which the midbrain, the amygdala, just simply gets hijacked, and it will no longer function, to give you the oxytocin, the reward hormone, until you do the thing you're addicted to. You'll notice that like in my own case, I began drinking alcoholically from the first time I drank. But that was mostly because of my other previous experiences. There weren't very many things that gave me that oxytocin rush, that gave me a sense of being rewarded or being, or having accomplished something or anything like that. But most people, when they become addicted to something, especially if they're not, genetically predisposed to it, take time, right? And in that time, the things that, used to give them a sense of personal reward or satisfaction, whatever, begin to dwindle. The reward center of the brain will simply stop providing that feeling, from the things that it used to provide it for. And it will only, in the case of a video game addiction, it will only produce that result when, when the addict is gaming, right? And like I say, that's terrifying, because as you say, on the surface, it looks so benign and harmless. What could be bad about chasing, sprites and pixels around a computer monitor? But it's devastating if that's the only thing that the person doing it can do in order to feel human. Because it means they're not going to do anything else unless they absolutely have to. And most of the time, they will only do it as a means to an end, the end being playing video games. The other end of that theory is that, more opportunities to become addicted begin to arise as what we all consider healthy activity and reward functions begin to dwindle. In my own recovery, I tell people all the time that, I took my last drink and my last suicide attempt 8 years ago, right? In that time, or at that time, things were not so great, right? The environment that I was in that, I might have been able to hold on to, was not great, but it wasn't this bad, right? Things are worse now in the environment that we're all in than, at any time previous in those 8 years, right? It's just been the whole reason to not being addicted and not being suicidal, the whole, set of reasons has gotten smaller and smaller. Now I have gotten better and better, which is nice for me, but it's because I do things that, that do still give me a sense of satisfaction and reward and, kind of rebuild my humanity, and my personal dignity, right? But the things I do, most people don't do. I do things like this, right? But it gives me that sense of reward, and presumably it's healthy to do this compared to, downing a couple of fifths of Jack Daniels and chasing it down with Bud Light. At least that's what they tell me.
Yeah.
but like I said, the specifics are what people get lost in. The specifics of being an alcoholic drinker or an abuser of narcotics, right? Or an addict, a sex addict that's constantly, pursuing meaningless and unhealthy sex, right? Or someone that, can't log off a Pornhub, or somebody that can't stay away from the horse track, or the casino, or the off-track betting, because it's the only thing that makes them feel human, right? And again, from the outside looking in, that sounds crazy and terrifying. How could anybody go through the world where the only way they feel human is when they're in a blackout drunk? And I can explain that I lived that way for a long time. And so I can tell you it is certainly possible,
Oh yeah.
but it's like, it's not good, and it's not, anybody would agree it's not healthy,
Well,
like
it
I said,
depends because, you do get certain people. You get surrounded with certain friends that tell you, "I like you better when you were drunk."
yeah, ironically, I have heard that. Not very often, though. I was a bad enough drunk that most people around me while I was drinking really wanted me to not drink, even if they were drinking with me. You know? But yeah, a lot of the time, the environment is unhealthy enough all by itself that, and again, it doesn't have to be a drunk with his drinking buddies or a drug abuser with, his fellow addicts, right? I mean, we all know that gamers, even the ones that are addicted, they tend to keep company with other gamers, right? Sometimes to the exclusion of everyone else, and the one thing that's kind of missing from the equation when trying to help them, is to look in the mirror and say, is it possible I'm at least part of this person's problem? If you can't do that, then I think the most generous numbers for recovery from addiction across the board hovers consistently somewhere between like 12 and 15%. Imagine if the successful recovery rate for example, you know, heart surgery was 12 to 15%.
Yeah, that'd be insane.
Yeah, be a lot of dead people, but for us, they've kind of learned how to just accept it. The reason they've learned how to accept it is because the real challenge and the real obstacle, is just admitting to and doing something about the fact that the rest of the environment for the addicted person is unacceptable because it's that dehumanizing. I mean, it's for a regular person without an addiction problem, it's always been that, yeah, life kind of stinks, but it's not that bad, and whatever it is it takes for it not to be that bad, they have it. The addicted person either never had it, like me, or had it at one point and lost it. Again, the missing the missing part of the equation, is just the simple fact that if things are bad enough, for people to drink themselves to death or commit suicide or just descend into sexual addiction until everything falls apart, or play video games in mom's basement until they're too old to see, that kind of thing. There's a reason for it, right? And that reason is a major challenge. And I'm sure you remember hearing me say more than once that the kind of changes that it's really going to take to really resolve all of these mental health issues is a terrifying, and unprecedented expense of time and money and manpower and resources, and not only in the actual expense of it, but in terms of the opportunity cost and productivity cost, because really making life livable for us, without extraordinary, interventions on our behalf and on our part, is gonna take changes that the world has never seen before, right? Starting with men and boys under no circumstances can ever be seen as in any way disposable again. That they have a value that's every bit as high as the value on women and girls. Everyone says, oh, well, of course, but in practice, in reality, it's not like that, right? and maybe it never has been. I don't know. I've only lived 60 plus years, but maybe it's never been that way. But now we've reached a point where it is either going to start being that way, or the one thing you can count on is people are going to come up with more and more different ways to exit reality. In a video game console, or a bottle, or a needle, or a strip club, or a casino.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the one thing about people, especially the ones that are desperate, we become, that desperation makes us very clever, right? It makes us very cunning, devious, and inventive, right? We can come up with all kinds of different ways to feel human, and to be, well, yeah, to feel like we are human. But the hard truth is a lot of those ways are sick, meaning that they are not healthy. They make us a danger to ourselves and others. And this, of course, the simple solution is, well, don't do that. But what you're doing is telling us, don't be human. Just be a cipher. Just a disposable object. And people aren't like that. We don't do that, right? We find ways to avoid feeling that way. And some of the ways we come up with are, really outrageous. I mean, people think like video gaming seems, when it's addictive, when someone's really addicted to it, on the surface, it looks like, wow, this person's really messed up. They never get away from the keyboard or the controller, and they're just stuck there, and it looks like, I don't know, off-putting.
Oh
But
yeah, true.
that's nothing. That's nothing. I have seen and been in company with people that make any video game addict look like a saint. I have sat at meetings with, been in company with, and drank with people that most people, they don't even know, like that people like that really exist. Right? And like I said, they do it because, for the same reason I did. It was the only thing we could do. And so, yeah, for a video game addict, if it's like that, and I've got every reason to believe that it is, it's not healthy, and it's probably going to come to a point where it's not safe. I don't know if we're there yet, but we're headed that way. But compared to addiction and addictive behavior that I have personal experience with, it's really not that bad. It really isn't.
Yeah,
It's
it's understandable.
yeah, at some point, and in fairness to the suffering of the video game addict, it's just like the suffering of a person with my kind of trauma. There are degrees, I mean, there are levels of how bad the trauma was. I mean, how long it lasted, or how violent it was, or what the circumstances were. But on the one hand, it should be recognized that there are, like I say, degrees of it. But on the other hand, trying to do something about it, trying to get better, you want to forget that. You want to not worry about who had the worst trauma. And for somebody struggling with addiction, it's never a good idea to try to figure out, who was addicted to the worst thing, or who was the most addicted to it, because it never resolves the problem. And the worst part about it is that, because, recovering from any addiction requires mutual support. In other words, it can't be done alone. Really, I mean, in any reasonable way, except for having yourself put under lock and key or hiring a bodyguard. You can't do it by yourself. You have to do it with other addicts. And again, this is one of those things. There's rules. That's just how it all works. And for a video game addict, it's no different than a drug addict or an alcoholic like me. If they expect to make a break from it, and get relief and do better, they need to just go ahead and plan on the idea that they're going to be doing it with other video game addicts. And that's just the way it is. There's no program for addiction recovery that doesn't include, real ongoing peer support. Once that tipping point of addiction is reached, and like I say, the midbrain is overrun with the addiction, they have found that is one of the parts of the brain, that doesn't entirely revert back to the condition it was in before the addiction.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't entirely heal. It's still disposed to react very strongly to going back into the addictive behavior. In my drinking career, I was sober for a little over 11 years. And from the very first drink I took after those 11 years, everything was exactly the same as it was, except probably stronger. The reaction, the sense or the experience that I was chasing after, like, showed up like a freight train. 11 years. I mean, I was eating, in those 11 years, I was eating healthy. I was, doing my life. I was like being involved in recovery and working on a career, the whole thing. It had nothing to do with drinking at all. And then as soon as I picked up a drink, it was all right back where it was. Like I say, 11 years is a long time for anybody. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, now that you mention alcohol, it reminds me of the politicization of addictions, like what happened with the prohibition. Like, a lot of people don't really know, but prohibition was spearheaded by three groups who really, like, they did such a great they really knew how to politicize that addiction, because like it was a group of very early feminists, socialists, and different denominations of Christians, and they all band together to form the temperance movement. And the reasons were, from the socialist perspective, it was like alcohol was created by the bourgeois to dull the senses of the worker, so they won't revolt, so they can be like they can be content with their material conditions. From the early feminist perspective, it was alcohol is turning the men into monsters that beat their wives. So and from the Christian perspective, it was alcohol was created by the devil to tempt people away from God and towards sin.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can see the way that we politicize addictions and how we create myths and narratives around it.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, like the socialists, the churches, and I guess feminism wasn't really codified back then, but women's rights. You want to talk about an unholy alliance?
Oh
And
yeah.
again, what did they come up with as a solution? They amended the whole US Constitution to say, sale and possession of sold alcohol, it was a constitutional crime. And it's like it provided for, an underground river of incentive and corruption and financial gain that we still haven't gotten over. I mean, it was repealed 10 years after it was ratified and enacted, and we're still struggling with it, right?
Well, it
Believe it
really
or
makes
not,
some families very powerful.
oh, it's very powerful. Believe it or not, you know that there are still bootleggers in America, people that still distill and sell bootleg alcohol. It's
Oh,
it's
it's the
only
moonshine.
Yeah, and it's really only because of just the trailing leftovers of repealing the act, that it would be taxed and regulated, and et cetera, et cetera. And you can still make a buck in certain parts of the country distilling Buffalo River Pride anyway, right? Uh, and it's like I said, we haven't gotten over it yet, because again, even back then, right? There was no how you put it, no incentive and no impulse to look at the world, that these people who drank existed in, and say, is the only problem the drunk, or the drug addict, or the video game addict, or the sex addict? Is the only problem that person, or is it at least some that person, and the rest of it the rest of us? Because, like I said, if life becomes unlivable for any certain group of people, the one thing you can count on is they will always find ways, to feel human anyway. We're human beings, man. We're clever, we're inventive, we're determined, we're driven, and an additional thing, we were talking about this yesterday on the stream, that makes us vulnerable, is that there are some people out there with very self-centered, greedy, or power hungry intentions, who look at things like that and say, I can make a buck, I can become powerful, I can control this, I can be an influencer in that arena, just by either demonizing the person addicted, or providing to the person who's addicted. Sometimes both. And like I
Hmm.
say, if that kind of person, as you mentioned, with prohibition, there were some families, some uh, uh, concerns, right? Groups, families, whatever, became very powerful and unimaginably wealthy because of this addiction. And to this day, those families are wealthy and powerful and untouched. You know, they had no consequence from it, right? And it happens every time. You know, um, like even Alphonse Capone, right? I mean, he ended up going to prison for a really long time, and they didn't even let him out until he was dying of syphilis. But it was not because he was a murderer, extortionist, pimp, and bootlegger. It's because he just didn't pay any taxes on it.
Hmm.
I'm like,
Sure.
nobody stops and looks at that and says, "Wait a minute, you know, are we sure the only crime this guy committed was not paying his taxes?"
Yeah.
Honest, real question.
So, when it comes to the politicization of addiction, like going back to like the video games, we can see the exact same thing, but obviously like alcohol and video games are very different. So the way the the way it is subverted is very different because from the political religious right perspective, it was like it used to be that video games were encouraging violence. Like that was the narrative. It was like the games are the real issue, you know, when it comes to the rise of school shootings or violence in general, or even the video game addiction. It wasn't really like treated as the individual is at fault. It was the games, you know.
Right. Right. Yeah,
So yeah,
I mean, in certain corners, they still try to resurrect that argument once in a while, both on the right and the left, but it's kind of a doomed project. The affected people and the people with a vested interest, they're not going to listen to that because it's just not true. You know,
yeah. Well,
um,
they have a political angle to push, you know.
right, right. I mean, it's some people with the ill intentions that I described, the greed for money and power. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes not, and or sometimes they're only moderately successful. But the fact remains that they're still out there, and they're still trying everything they can think of to exploit the the misery of others, right? And they do it because they can, and because they don't have, whatever parts of the conscience and the moral compass would cause a person to just not do that, even if they could, and it's like, unless we figure out a way, to just get rid of people like that, they will always be there. And if everyone doesn't start agreeing that things like addiction, and a lot of different kinds of neuroses, anxiety, predisposition to being depressed, that there's an environmental function at work making that happen, then, like I said, those people are always going to be looking to make a buck on it, and at some point, I can't even get any more angry with them than I am with, just the apathy of everyone else. Dr. King said, something along the lines of, the thing to fear the most is not necessarily the evil, the children of darkness, evil doers, but the apathy of, good people. It was a much different quote than that, but that was the idea, and even in people that, or even with people that, I've come to know and really really love and trust, that's one idea that's still a really hard sell. It's difficult to get it across to someone. I mean, everybody has a little, suffering and setbacks and disruptions and pain in their life. But, if it's not extraordinary, right? If they've just been lucky, it's really difficult to convince them that a big part of the problem with people who suffer is the world that they're living in. And I don't necessarily blame them for that, because that's a scary concept, that the person in their life that, died of alcoholism or committed suicide or, became a school shooter, whatever. I mean, it's difficult to look away from that person and what they did and look around and say, it's not, as much of a surprise that they did this as I thought it was going to be. In a few sessions back of the podcast, Dead Duck and I were talking about the hero, the the condition of being a hero or being, doing heroic acts. And, one thing for me that always pops up, right, is that, regardless of, I guess, how well received the hero is after they become a hero, there's two things. A lot of the time, that hero is, driven to become a hero because they were rejected by, the community that they were in to begin with, and whether or not that's true, when they become a hero, the rest of the people can't bring themselves to just treat him or her like a regular person again. So it's like the hero returns to the village, but the village is still guilty of being the village, right? The village that drove him or her to become a hero to begin with. Like I said, that's scary. That means everybody's got a little responsibility, and everybody has a little culpability. In the talk we had after the stream yesterday, one of the people on the stream, was challenging me about being a boomer, right? Which I kind of am, and that the simple reality is a lot of the degradation, of our culture and social order can be traced back to, well, I would say, my generation and the generation before mine. And, the thing that kind of singles me out is I'm more than willing to admit that, it's because it's true, right? I'm no different than anybody else. I don't want to take on responsibility, something's not my fault, right? And like almost all of this is not my fault, but I was there, right, the whole time, and I know I didn't do anything about it. I don't know, maybe I couldn't have. Probably I couldn't have. The point is I didn't try, and it's like I've got to own that, and say, yeah, I could have done something. It probably wouldn't have worked, and it might not have been very much at all, but I could have done something. I just didn't, I was busy being suicidal drunk.
It's understandable, yeah. Other people will blame you for it.
No, I don't think so. I mean, people don't, once they know anything about me, then they're like, nah, that wasn't you. I'm like, that's almost 100% right. It wasn't me. But when I look back, I mean, I can point to times in my life where, I might have been able to make a little bit of difference in a tiny little way. The point is I didn't, and I've found that ever since, I started being able to admit that to myself and to other people, all of a sudden, for one thing, I don't want to die, right? And I don't need a drink, and I don't hate everything, and I don't hate everybody, and I don't hate myself. But before I could do that, before I could take on my own, right? I couldn't understand anybody else's either. Right? I couldn't understand anybody else, being afraid to make things better, because, I thought I was the only one who couldn't make things any better. Right. And it turns out we're all wrong. We can all make things a teeny, tiny little bit better. And the magic of it is that, it can always be a little bit better one person at a time. It can be a little bit better, small groups at a time. But what's yet to be proven, but I have a strong hunch, is that things could be a lot better if it's all people at a time.
There was the politicization of addiction is something that is still going on to this day. Going back to that issue, and I think that we have seen what the religious right can do, you know, from their perspective. Now we're seeing like what the the feminist left can do when it comes to any issue, and their like their issue is video games are causing sexism. That's their angle. So we
Mhm.
have like the right saying like video games cause violence. They got the left saying video games cause sexism. So the fight continues from another angle. It's just another thing that we have to get on top of that. And in my opinion, like we have that is part of the problem because like when you have people who are addicted and you have so many people, so many political pundits that want to wrestle that conflict away from a real solution, just so they can push their political narrative. Well, that is going to cause a lot of problems when it comes to how we give them a solution to it. And I don't know, I've never seen like alcohol abuse rates during prohibition before and after. But I do think that like when we obscure reality to push for political ideas,
Yeah.
then we do hurt the people that we need to help the most. So
Yeah.
if I'm correct, I'll wager that during prohibition, alcoholism was even worse because it wasn't really being addressed, the actual root cause.
Right. It
And
was
yeah,
exactly. I mean, it was more intense. It was more dangerous. I don't know if you've ever heard of something called bathtub gin, but it was literally,
oh yeah,
alcohol distilled in bathtubs using, uh, you know, lead pipes, right? Because
oh
they had
yeah, I
lead.
remember that.
Yeah, they had
That's
lead pipes
horrifying.
back then. And basically it was poison, you know. But the uh the other part of it was that, you know, um in certain areas of the country, especially, the use of alcohol dropped because people didn't want to be criminals in those places. But for the, in places and among people where it didn't drop, it went underground, obviously. It became a lot more dangerous, became a lot more fraught. And for addicts, people who genuinely, needed to drink, it became you every time you went to go, like hook up with your bootlegger, you take your life in your hands, right? So it
True.
was, you know, the raw numbers might not have been any more, or they might not have been even as high. But they know that, the incidence of like death and disability related directly to alcohol use went up. The two guys that founded Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, were uh, they were routine visitors to what were alcoholism treatment facilities at the time, which kind of just a spin dry. I mean, uh, they taper you off of alcohol and, give you all kinds of stuff like bleached lightning, which don't even ask, and tie you to a bed until your withdrawal was over with, and hope that your heart didn't stop or you didn't have a stroke while you were withdrawing, because that's that's how you die of alcohol withdrawal, is either heart failure or massive stroke, during, because you have seizures. When the last time I withdrew by myself and I had seizures. And it's like a lot. Seizures isn't just you flop around for a little while and then you're okay. It can cause brain damage. They can stop your heart. They can cause respiratory arrest. They can make you go blind. They can give you a stroke. Where your vessels in your brain bleed out. Right? So it's no bueno, man. I
Mm.
don't recommend it.
Oh
But
yeah.
like these two guys, they went through that. You know, um, and in the process, They realized that, you know, their lives were at stake and they weren't going to be able to do it alone. And they were not going to find a solution by continuously going back to the hospital, you know, because there was nothing they could do for them, right? Except, like I say, you know, strap them down, give them good food, uh, give them stuff like belladonna and bleached lightning. You know, that's just what they did back then, you know. And hydrotherapy, which is basically just, you know, uh, what do you call, you know, swimming and floating around in water to try to calm down and re-regulate your body. Basically, a bunch of stuff that didn't work, you know. But it would at least help them feel a little bit better for a little while, you know. And then they would just like, okay, good luck. We'll see you again in a couple of months, you know.
Yeah.
Which sounds terrible, but what else could they do? You know, they were sending them back out into a world, you know, that they couldn't function in without being drunk all the time. You know? And again, you know, since then, like one thing in the early to mid 70s that people in America were really frightened of was the fact that a lot of soldiers in Vietnam, while the war was still going on and shortly after it was over, you know, the soldiers were cycling out and returning home, but while they were there, they had become addicted to heroin, you know, because they did. I mean, you know, some of them were, you know, greatly addicted to heroin, and everybody was afraid that, you know, like 90% of the Vietnam veterans were going to be just permanent heroin addicts, you know? But because of the fact that there was a, you know, like an economic upturn shortly after the war ended, and a lot of the veterans, you know, were handled properly. You know, they found it pretty easy to recover from the addiction. You know, so it was a big scare for nothing. You know, but the point is that you know, the conditions in their life, as people on the left would say, their material conditions improved to the point where you know, their sense of themselves and their sense of their humanity no longer depended on having heroin, you know, so that they were like, you know, heroin's illegal anyway, and I don't want to go to jail. I've got what I want, you know, home, family, 2 cars in the garage, a decent job, blah, 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 you know. And so like, I don't need it. Right. Like I said, you know, even for people who have those things, you know, it's not a rock solid guarantee that it's going to be enough, you know. And you know, if the rest of the culture that they're in and the life that they have is too dehumanizing, you know, and doesn't give them enough sense of value, why should they not drink or get high? You know, if that's the only thing that works, that's what we're going to do. You know? The same thing with same thing with somebody that's suicidal or with a process addiction. You know, it isn't, you know, I tell people all the time, for maybe a year after my last drink, you know, 90% of my motivation to get well was just fear of going back there. You know, I mean, I was terrified of the idea of, you know, even accidentally picking up a drink. It just, you know, it kept me awake at night sometimes. But time goes on, and, you know, there's some time between the current day and your last drink, you know, basically, you know, the like worst moment of your life. And you need something to keep going, you know. In the 11 years that I was sober before that, like I said, I didn't have that, you know. What I had was being afraid of my last drunk, right? And at that time, I mean, my last drunk was in 1990, and what happened was, I got arrested for DUI, right? I mean, the case was adjudicated and, it was diverted to treatment. And everybody was really nice to me and they were really glad that, I was on the right track, and they were really glad I wasn't drinking, you know. But most importantly, like I said, they instilled in me fear of, repeating that process. And it worked. It worked for all that time, like I said, it never works long enough to keep going all the time. Just being afraid is a terrific motivator to change. Once you have changed, you need a motive not to change back. These are things just about how people are. I've had that conversation with more recovering alcoholics than I can count, that like really made it, and they're really okay. They've been sober, most of them longer than me, right? And the story's kind of the same. I just live this way now, and I like it, right? And I've found a place where I can be this way and be happy, and be human. Like I said, that you're still talking about a 12 to 15% circumstance. It's not enough. Again, really conservative estimates, only for alcohol and drug addiction is 1 in 10 people, in the US. Right now, 1 in 10, it's like, that's 40 million people, man. That's a lot of people.
Oh
40
yeah,
million,
absolutely.
that's a lot of people. And if it's, if 88% of them, either don't get clean or sober, or get that way and don't stay that way, that's not good. And it doesn't account for other addictions like video games and gambling and porn and
Yeah.
work, you know.
Well, there's something interesting is like the when it comes to like sex addiction, masturbation,
Mhm.
and video game addiction. Those are all things that we don't see in the street. So it's
Mm-mm.
like, well, we can only see the heroin junkie like
Right.
having spasms in the street with broken needles and such. And that's when we detect the epidemic, That's when we
Right.
realize that it's bad.
Yeah.
But when the addict is at home, then we can't really see it.
Yeah. I mean,
Mm.
the drunk stumbling out of the bar at dawn, or, on video, running through the liquor store, you know, stuffing liquor bottles in a bag and then running out.
Mm.
We can see stuff like that. We don't like to see stuff like that, but it's visible, but somebody sitting quietly, I say in their bedroom or basement, whatever, uh, playing a video game with headphones on, you know, it's like, it's very difficult uh, to make that real for most people.
Oh yeah, it's
Um,
I don't know. Some would even say that it's even harder because it's like I don't know. I did mention the Hikkikomori crisis, and
yeah, let's hear
I don't
about
know if
that
did I ever explain to you what it was?
a little bit, but why don't you go ahead and give us an outline?
Yeah, because it really ties into this conversation. It's like it's mostly like a Japanese words because it's the Japanese coin it. Uh, I don't know if they were like the first to detect it. I'm not really sure, but it's like it means being confined or something like that. So it's like people like it could be anyone, it could be like teenager or like an adult, and they stop working or they stop working and going to school, and they just spend their times at home. And it's not, it is different from like video game addiction. It's not like they stay at home just because they want to play like video games or like read comic books or whatever. It's just and it is also different from the what is it called? The fear of the open spaces. I don't know what the name was. It's not.
Agoraphobia.
Oh, what was that?
Agoraphobia.
I was thinking of that word, but I don't really remember if that was that. But yeah, so some word like that. It is different. It's not like they're afraid of the outside. It's just like it's a social phenomenon in which they feel like a lot of Japanese sociologists, they believe like real, like the outside world has so many pressures for them to succeed, and
Mhm.
the risk of failure is so high that they rather don't not even try. They're
Right.
like my only move is not to play, That's how
Mhm.
they see it.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so there's some key uh points for Hikkikomori. Is like they spend like almost every hour at home, and they have very like few social relationships outside, and they like one specific point is like they don't have like specific mental illnesses. It's not like they have autism and therefore the autism is causing the hikikomori behavior. It's like it's it's mostly like they're perfectly like normal people, and it's
Right.
just like they are withdrawing from the environment.
Mhm.
Yeah. And another point is like they don't seem to have like I don't know, like many traumas. Even though like a lot of people say like if you do have trauma and you do have autism, you're more likely to become a hikikomori. But
Yeah.
people tend to fixate on the normal people
Mhm.
because it's so rare to see that happen. It's like,
Yeah.
but yeah, like a lot of people say like Japanese society, it's geared towards us putting pressure onto people to
Right.
succeed. And the failure there, when you fail so hard that you either like completely disappoint your parents,
Mhm.
you get at risk of having a horrible job for the rest of your life.
Mhm.
Consequences are so dire that it's like you either succeed or you either succeed or succeed. And
Mhm.
people are gonna fail in such system, and nobody wants to be the failure. So
Right.
eventually, some of those people like they rather not even play the game. And
Right.
it's like they estimate that like 500,000 people are already hikikomoris in Japan,
Right.
and even though it's like uh, an international phenomenon.
Mhm.
So
It
so
is.
it
I mean,
yeah
it's got different, I guess, labels and expressions depending on where you are. Before we talked, I did a little looking around about, Japanese hikikomori, and basically it's just that, it's, just disdain and despair about the culture and the social order in Japan, to the point where, it's like, why, as you say, why even try? You know,
yeah true.
the chances of success, become narrower literally every year. And beyond that, the consequences for failure continue to get more and more dire. And it just becomes an unwise investment to go out into the world. And, over here, or in the West in general, you've got MGTOW and, oh, a lot of the left is, is really committed to withdrawal from the system. They seem to be still convinced that, that uh, political activism and street activism is somehow going to, correct it, in a permanent and sustainable way. I am skeptical. you know.
Mm.
I'm not saying it's impossible. All I'm saying is, there's a lot with them that's not accounted for. The thing with, and this is so typical of, um, normies, especially in the West, with MGTOW, is maybe 15 or 20 years ago, you know, their their movement philosophy, whatever you want to call it, might have made some really significant and positive change in the world. They really, I mean, they were in a unique position to really pull that off. I mean, they wouldn't make things perfect, but I'm pretty sure that had they played their cards properly, they would have made things better for everybody, men and women. They just didn't do it, you know.
Mm.
And whenever I talk about this, I make comparisons to the labor movement, right? The labor movement, at least in the U.S., started out, under very dire circumstances and with a lot of violent resistance. People were murdered over, trying to get the labor movement started, right? And a lot of people had their lives ruined, and went to prison, et cetera, et cetera. But now we have an established um, labor movement, right? It's
Mm.
certainly it's had its time of being corrupted and rendered ineffective and so forth, but it exists. And for that reason, I get paid time and a half for every hour over 40 hours a week. I'm only, the law says I'm, only going to have to work at maximum 6 days a week, right? I have health insurance that is part of my, full-time job, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. None of that existed before there was a labor movement, right? And what the labor movement was in the beginning, and should be more now than it is, was simply the idea that collectively working people can simply stop working until conditions improve. It does not mean that if they go on strike, they hate their job. It does not mean that if they go on strike, they forget how to do their job.
Oh
It
yeah,
does
true.
it does not mean they're incentivized to go on strike because of the money, because in many cases strike wages are less than minimum wage.
True. Yeah.
It's not going to be without a sacrifice. Sometimes it's necessary. And the same thing is true for things like in over here, MGTOW. They could have just
Oh
said, look,
yeah.
we love women and we're going to keep loving women. We're just not going to have anything to do with them until it's safe to do so. It's not
Yeah.
that complicated.
You
And
mentioned the MGTOW, and
mhm,
there is a Japanese equivalent to the MGTOW.
mhm,
They're the herbivore men.
right,
Yeah, the herbivore.
right, same
So
principle.
same, exactly the same.
Yeah. And again, the rational and common sense thing to do, if you're going to do something like that, is just make it clear that the only reason you're pulling out and walking away and going to the picket line is because the conditions of the job are unsafe,
True.
or
Yeah,
that the conditions of the employment contract are unacceptable, that they're unlivable, right?
that's very
One,
smart, actually.
yeah,
Yeah,
all you got to do is fix that, and we right back to work.
yeah. Because like right now, like the Japanese government, they do know that the Hikkikomori and the herbivore men, they are a problem because it's tanking their productivity.
Right.
But because they're silently protesting,
Mhm.
there is no deal. There's nothing they can do, you know.
Right.
So it is
Right.
true what you're saying. It's totally
Yeah.
true.
No, that's exactly it. I mean, it's kind of a power mismatch if the only other concerned party is the Japanese government, but it's not unexpected because the Japanese government and Japanese business are kind of like one and the same. So, but again, that's just how they do it over there. But over here, like I said, I would not want the federal government of the United States, frankly, to have anything much to say about, men either being willing or being unwilling to have relationships with women, except for them, to get their nose out of it, right? Which right now, for really 50, 60 years, they've failed at that, right? And the proper response should have been, among men to say, well, okay, we're just not going to do that anymore. We are not going to be fathers. We are not going to be husbands. We are not going to be boyfriends. We are not going to be, lovers. We're going to stop, right? And we're going to keep stopping until y'all fix this. We don't care how you fix it, as long as you fix it. Once you fix it, we'll be right back. I say, don't,
Yeah.
I've read, especially, this is one thing about MGTOW that just drives me right over the falls, is all of the, oh boy, like evolutionary psychology and, I guess, like political reactionaryism, for lack of a better term, just being, like traditional conservative about it. And it's like, you don't have to do any of that. You don't have to write big, long books about it, or, like big blog posts and YouTube. Just tell people, love women. I've always loved women. I'm just not going to have that to do with them until this gets fixed. I mean, I am, if I was a young man, I'd say, look, I'm still fully functional, and ready to go. It's just that I'm not going to go until it's safe to go. Period. End of, and just leave it, just walk away, and just say, I'm not,
Yeah.
forget it. You call me when you're ready, and until then, I'm going to be over there.
I
Right.
think political involvement is very important when it comes to protesting, because you can totally see that some MGTOWs are trying to wave the flag to whatever political movement they can appeal to for
Yeah.
any deal or solution.
Yeah.
So, well,
And well, for me personally, and from what I've seen, I guess I would do that if I thought it would work,
hmm,
but this is waving the flag and kind of uh supporting the kind of systems that got us into this mess in the first place.
oh yeah,
This is, appealing to the fox to take better care of the hen house. They're just not going to do it. They're the scorpions. They will sting, right? Even if it means both the scorpion and the frog, sink halfway across the river. They can't help us. I wish they could, right? Because it's not like we don't give them a lot of money. We give between, here in the US and up there by you in, America's hat. And
hmm,
in the European Union and certainly the United Kingdom, the kind of men, that are having so much trouble contribute enormous, like unprecedented resources to our governments. Like the kinds of, support and uh, uh, financial stability that's never been seen before in human history, right? And what they're not doing with it is taking any care of us. Instead, most of the time they're making us either disposable or targets. And I tell people, if you don't believe me, go look and see who's in prison. Because by and large, it's not a lot of women. The United Kingdom, they keep wrangling to, abolish putting any women in prison, which I'm like, good luck with that.
Yeah, well, you know, wouldn't it be the biggest 4D chess move for all the criminals to start identifying as women?
Yeah,
So
so
that would be pretty incredible.
yeah, I mean the precursor to that already occurs over here, which really activates the, like the more radical and reactionary feminists, because they say, wait a minute, these are guys, that's what they are. Now, there's just a like unending back and forth argument about whether that's an accurate statement or not. Being just a completely invisible, old and broken cisgendered white guy, I enjoy the luxury of not having to worry about it as long as I stay out of trouble. Right. And as long as I stay invisible, I stay out of trouble. I'm not, you know, I'm not contributing much, right? And I'm not doing what is expected of me, right? But at least I don't have to worry about stuff like that, And like a trans activist would hear me say something like that and be like, how could you? Don't you care about me? And, to that I would have to respond, I do care about you. The trouble is you don't care about me, and that creates a mismatch that renders both of us useless. Right. So
Yeah,
better
it's
just,
fair to say.
yeah, it's better just to leave me alone. I can't help you, you know. It's all I tell people, it's always one thing in an argument to tell people, why can't you help me? Right. Because that leaves you vulnerable to being judged unworthy of the help. But if I tell anybody I can't help you, which is true most of the time, for one thing, it's true. For another thing, it's like, what are you going to do? Complain? Go ahead. Whether I think you're worthy of the help or not, I'm incapable. But like I said, for in Japan, Hikkikomori, and over here the black pillars, who are not all incels. Some of them are just completely in despair. It's like they know they could go out and hook up at least, or whatever. It's just that things are so bad and so dangerous and so precarious that again, they don't want to, they're frightened of it, you know. And like I said, it would be one thing if that fear was unfounded, if that fear was unreasonable. But we've put ourselves in a place where it's not unreasonable anymore, nor is it unreasonable for a union worker, to go on strike if he knows that if he doesn't go on strike, he's got a better than even chance of falling to his death before lunch. Like I said, it's a matter of looking at things honestly. And the Hikikomori in Japan, MGTOW and black pillars over here, all they really need at this point is clear and actionable evidence that they don't have to worry about what they are worrying about. But like I said, until that's actually true, until it really is true that, there's, only moderate risk to becoming, a father, husband, lover, a contributor to a family, until it's safe enough to say, okay, I'm good, let's go. They're not going to do it, And if that means that means it can mean staying a shut in, right? Like they are in Japan, or, falling into addiction to porn or video games. That's what they're going to do, And, if the alternative is like taking those things away from them, or just like they did with prohibition of alcohol, that was the federal government and the Constitution of the Congress saying we're just not going to allow it anymore, what happened? It failed so badly, right? That, like I said, we haven't gotten over it yet. It's like, do you want to keep doing this? We've been slowly but surely kind of, trying to back out of the war against drugs because we lost it before we ever started it, right? And, the kinds of people that took advantage of it and exploited it, again, these are some of the wealthiest people that, that have ever lived, right? But their wealth is invisible because it comes from an underground economy, an unrecognized economy. But there are cartels in South America that basically run whole countries, from the home of a family or two. Right?
True.
And like I say, at that point, who the hell cares about things like money? When all you have to do is lift a finger and everybody in eyesight, jumps to do your bidding. You see what I mean? And that's
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
they politicized and criminalized a healthcare issue. And it's like it's going to happen that way every time, man. Every time. Unless we become something other than people, it is inevitable that whatever you restrict people from that they firmly believe they really need to feel human, they will find alternative means to make it happen. And people with, people of violence and cupidity, like serious greed, they will take advantage of it. And whatever it is they get while the addiction is taken away, they will keep it. Okay? The people that began their fortunes during Prohibition, they still have the money, or their estates, their families, their descendants, they still got the money, still there. And it's like, what makes you think this is any different? It's not, it's just not. I mean, I wish that wasn't true, man. I wish we were like ants or termites, and we were all just like hardwired eusocial creatures that were completely selfless, but we're not. We're people. We're irrational. We're selfish, right? We're fearful, paranoid. In groups, we're tyrannical. Right? That's what we are. And the only way to beat that is for individuals to just refuse to be that way. And that's the hardest job of all.
It's understandable, yeah. Well, I tend to be like I tend to believe that as long as the system that we create can be retrofitted into being strong enough to withstand corruption, then I think we'll be okay. Like, I don't really want people to change, but I want the system to adapt itself to be better at catching corruption and corrupt people in general. And oh, there was one thing I wanted to mention that I totally forgot. It was about the Hikkikomori behavior, and it was something that I know about, like very rigid societies, societies that have a very high percentage of suicides. It's like it reminded me like so we have a population that is pressured to succeed, and it just occurred to me like some of those people succeed, some of them fail, and they keep trying again. Some of them they do become shut-in hikikomoris, but some other people they actually just commit suicides, and it is part of like I just realized that it is part of like uh the big panorama that I'm seeing, like in such societies. And we also don't get to talk too much about that because like we don't really get to see it. So I do see all those things to be connected.
Yeah.
All of it at the same time is like it is the options that are given to people that sound the most appealing. It's like you can some people hate the idea of failing so much, or maybe they're so defeated that like suicide sounds like so much a better option, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, uh, my journey through suicidality, um, basically, it's recovery means, that you can successfully work around it, right? The person that never becomes suicidal, the reason that they want to stay alive is because they're still alive. It's just sort of a closed loop of reason. It's like I want to keep living because I'm still alive, right? And for me or anybody like me, it'll never be that way again. I won't ever only want to stay alive because I'm currently alive. you know I love my life as it is now, and I am very glad that I was unsuccessful before. I'm grateful for it, but the hard fact is, um, I'm not grateful for it just because I didn't die. And for somebody that is successful, right? That they actually successfully kill themselves, right? Um, the problem is, you know, you don't ever hear from them. That um, they don't have a voice to fill in the missing pieces. To the people that, I mean, a lot of times if somebody successfully kills themselves, they leave behind, other people who are just completely devastated, right? And their life is altered, if not ruined, but permanently. You know, and the one there's yeah, anger. I mean, the whole 5 stages of grief, but the one thing that just nags at them, right, and won't leave them alone, right, is, like I say, these missing pieces for why this person really thought, that they would be better off dead and that everyone else would be better off if they were dead. Because remember, it doesn't, it's very seldom enough motivation to kill yourself if if you're only looking for relief for yourself, right? You also have to be pretty convinced that everyone else would be better off if you're not here. Now, of course, like here in 2023, and 8 years since my last attempt, and I talk about this pretty openly, and other people who know me, what they have to say about it is, well, of course we are better off that you are not dead. Which, again, it sounds kind of ridiculous, saying it like that, but at the time, I did not know that, right? I didn't.
Yeah, well,
And
at that time you didn't know them specifically. So,
and it's for me, it's sort of this ongoing conversation with, um, I call it the guy in the corner of my mind. Now, because he's always sitting in the corner of my mind, reminding me that, hey, Les, don't forget, if things get bad enough, you can always jump under a train, right? You know, and like now more than ever, uh, it's no loss, and I always can come back and say, no, that's just not true. That's it. It doesn't account for, everything that's in my life now, and things are not that bad. I'm not saying they can't be, right? I don't predict the future, but now and into the foreseeable future, I don't have enough reason to end my life, you know. But it's like that. It's more uh mindful, it's more because of what I have, as a living person, right? But the people who, who passed away by suicide, I would never pretend to say that they were wrong, because I don't know, right? I would never like sit up and act like I know better than they did, okay? Because I wanted to be with them, and I had just as much reason as they did, right? And for them, you know, uh, like I guess I wouldn't say it out loud to a loved one that they left behind, but to just the general public, I'm happy to say, I did not survive suicide. I failed to kill myself. Okay? I am currently grateful that I failed, but that means also that I can never pass any kind of judgment, or make any kind of criticism against somebody who did not fail.
Hmm.
Like I said, it's I hate to put it in such harsh terms, but the reality is that again, even in the time that I've gotten better, you know things have gotten worse, right? I am happier than I was. The thing is, nobody else is. The level of anxiety and depression and substance abuse and family violence and certainly suicide, is just blossoming all over the place. You know, and I'm like, you know, we're coming to a decision gate where we really do just have to decide things are bad enough that everybody has to pick up a little bit of the burden and do their part, or we just let it all come completely apart. Me talking about it, on a podcast that only a few people look at anyway, is not going to turn the crank.
Well, I can thoroughly say something positive about it. It's like it's always good to live by example. And in my opinion, you are a really good example of what happens when people don't kill themselves, You get to live and you get to help other people. And, there are other people who look up to you. So that's always a positive. So
Thank you.
it is that um it gives it gives hope to people, knowing that it can be done, knowing that there is someone here that actually exists. It's not just some hypothetical person that didn't kill themselves. It's like it is you, and you are there, present, and you get to tell them that you're only here because you're still alive and you're helping and making them feel better and all of that. So you are actually the example of the "it gets better" phrase.
Thank you. And that hearing you say that makes me grateful. And when I get into those back and forths with that guy in the corner of my mind, I'm happy to tell him, I'm not pulling this out of my butt, right? This is reports from other people. And, at the end of the day, sure, it gives me, a sense of purpose and kind of like my place in things or whatever have you. But most important of all, it's probably, what I was missing the whole time, right? Was the ability to be this way, to help people and want to help people, and hear back that it worked. That activates my, the reward center of my brain. Says, I pulled it off, right? I did a good thing and I got away with it. And I don't know, for somebody who has been suicidal, and I know a few, and they're still with us, right? But they're hurting, and they're frightened, that one day they might pull it off. They might actually kill themselves. And, it's because this is hard. And I have, in order to be honest with them, I have to tell them that, yes, it for sure can be done, and yes, it's totally worth it, no matter how bad things have been. It's 100% worth it, but it's not free. In my case, yeah, I mean, it cost me enough money to buy a house and a car with, and that's just the money. Forget about the time and the effort and the pain and the effort, determination. I had to have all that, and for a lot, well, at least some of them, I told them that one thing that really helped me do that was the fact that I was doing it without family obligations. My focus was not divided. The only thing I had to worry about focusing on was doing my job to get paid, and get insurance. And then after that, it was just nothing but, getting better. No kids, no spouse, no in-laws, no family, none of that. But some of these guys, they have that, and if they're suicidal, right, it's like the ways that we help them. For one thing, I can't do it alone, obviously, but for another thing, to do it collectively, right, we have to do a whole lot better than we've been doing, otherwise, honestly, expect very few of them to survive. Some, yes, but by no means all of them. Some of them are going to die by their own hand, and it's like we won't have anyone to blame but ourselves. And like I said, when I tell people that I have a tiny little bit of responsibility for how things are for everybody now, that's what I mean. And so I'm kind of like, one of the most satisfying things about, living this way now is just the fact that I don't have that feeling like I'm making up for lost time, that I'm doing it now, and that's enough. So anyway, I guess we've been at this for a couple of hours now. Did you have anything else you wanted to say?
Let me think. So we talk about a very wide range of issues, and okay, so we become with the addiction, the politicization, how it compares to like the previous, like the biggest one, the alcohol addiction, the prohibition. Then we talk about the Hikkikomori, the ones that actually commit suicide and all of that. I think like I said everything I wanted to say. And yeah, I do like how we can talk about those issues without like bringing the any like political spin, to try to mud it up. As you like this types of conversations where we can just talk about it in a very neutral manner. Because I do think this is how it should be handled, to be honest.
I think so. Like politics has a place. Politics is inevitable of one kind or another. But it's kind of a blunt instrument. It's dull and inaccurate, right? And these things that we're talking about today, they're some of the most like delicate and precarious things about people that there have ever been. I think when I think of a Hikkikomori or a shut-in over here or any kind of an addict, I do think about the fear and despair and sense of isolation and alienation of the family members around them. That for a good example is a Hikkikomori, who's being supported by in most cases his family, and they have a motive to continue supporting him in his isolation because probably on some level they know that if they don't, he might kill himself, and they don't want that, right? They want this person to live even if they're miserable, right? But the truth is they would rather this person just not be miserable. I can't tell you how many people, in my addiction told me, that they felt terrible, for me, and they felt terrible that, they couldn't help me, but they had to, turn away from me and abandon me because they couldn't keep watching me. They knew what was going to happen and they just couldn't stick around for it. I don't blame them. I guess I would have done the same. I don't know, but it doesn't, it isn't always just like the severe addict or the deeply traumatized person, or the one that is, like profoundly mentally disabled, like a schizophrenic, or someone who's physically disabled. Some people, even under those conditions, they're still okay. You know, they're still able to, to be positive and be hopeful, right? And the truth is, I just wasn't one of those people, um, and who knows why exactly, but that's the way it works out, but like I said, for somebody who's trying to, deal with and not abandon somebody with a video game addiction, or a substance addiction, or just, despair about the, uh, their place in the world, so that they choose to withdraw from it. That it's like, what do they do? My ex-wife, finally, after like 20 years, she finally turned to the world at large for help to deal with me. The best they could come up with was, divorce him, keep the house, and kick him to the curb. So that's really just not good enough, right? And it won't ever be. Abandoning people and exiling them and othering and dehumanizing and criminalizing people, the morality aside, it just doesn't work. It's ineffective. It will not give you what you want, and it never has. And as long as we're just people, it never will. That's the rules. And
Yeah.
most of the time, the object of that exile and abandonment, they, one way or another, they tend to disappear, right? They go off the grid, they become invisible, they blow their brains out, they jump under trains, they take all the stuff in the medicine cabinet, whatever the case. But you can't call that a win. So anyway, Mao, thank you so much. As always, I'm so grateful for time to talk with you. You really are getting kind of a big place in my heart in a short period of time. You are,
That's good to know.
you really are. I am very, very grateful that I know you. I admire you quite a lot. So thank you.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to be here. And you already had a place in my heart like a long time ago. Um, just from what I heard about you. And yeah, it's always nice to come here to this podcast, especially when I do believe I have something intelligent to say. So it's really cool that you allow me to introduce these topics.
Sure. They were good topics. So anyway, thank you again. Thank you everybody for listening. And we will see you again next time.
See you next time.
Bye.